The ACIP has been captured by CDC bureaucrats and personnel. Donald Trump is not going to get a Nobel Prize for the Operation Warp Speed and his work product, the COVID-19 vaccine. That is just propaganda. We're going to see all kinds of applications, new clinical trials, indications, sales pitches and propaganda, assertions that we can do things like fix the God gene through genetic modification. Can we say that there won't be genetic superhumans? I suspect that there will be at some point in time.
Hey guys, Alex Newman here, CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media. Before we get back to this incredible interview with Dr. Robert Malone, I want to let you know about our sponsors. This episode, this special report, is brought to you by our good friends over at Victory Nutrition International. Now, we get a lot of requests to advertise different companies, and supplements are right up there. There's a lot of companies that do supplements, and there's a lot of good ones. But typically, we have said no to a lot of these. But then when we came across Victory Nutrition International, we realized this was a whole different animal here. This is a company that has a proprietary technology called Protosome that actually helps your body absorb 100% of the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, the enzymes that you're trying to get. They've got a product line that is absolutely incredible. I'm using it every day now, and I haven't felt better in a really long time. They've got Trim Rocks, they've got Nsorb, they've got Protovite. We'll be talking to you about these throughout the show, but I do want to encourage you to get over to the website, vni.life/Newman. That's vni.life/Newman, and check it out. I guarantee you're going to love this stuff too. It's vni.life/Newman. And if you use the promo code Newman20, you're actually going to get a 20% discount on your order. So go check it out, vni.life/Newman. Now back to our incredible interview with Dr. Robert Malone. Folks, the Big Pharma industry is under attack and under pressure like never before, with the Make America Healthy Again movement, with the Trump administration, with Robert F. Kennedy, with the controversy surrounding the COVID pandemic and really the government response to that, and of course the mRNA technologies that have become such a huge part of not just the pharmaceutical industry world, but even regular everyday conversations among Americans. So I can't think of a better individual to be with, and I can't think of a better time to be with him than the great Dr. Robert Malone. He has been on with us many times in the past. He's, of course, an internationally recognized scientist, a medical doctor. He is the original inventor of mRNA vaccination as a technology, DNA vaccination. He's got all kinds of intellectual property and amazing work to his name. Unbelievably smart. He's got degrees. He's got patents. He's got a bio that we could spend the whole hour talking about. We're very glad that he could join us today for the hour. He's got about 100 scientific publications with over 15,000 citations of his work, folks, just to give you some sense of this man's productivity. He now is the co-chair of the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which, as you probably noticed, has been in the headlines for weeks, and I suspect that will continue. He's also the medical advisor to the MAHA Alliance, a 501c4 organization. Dr. Malone, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me on once again, Alex. It was great to see you at the recent rally, and I look forward to seeing you in the future in person, but glad to be here for this particular recording and broadcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malone. So we're seeing something of an earthquake. I frankly never expected to see this in my life, having followed this for about 15 years now. We see now the President of the United States openly expressing hostility to the major pharmaceutical companies. He's made a few social media posts that have gone viral that actually attack vaccines in a way that for years, for decades, was relegated to the realm of crazy conspiracy kook stuff. What's your take? Are these real dangers that the President and the Secretary of Health and Human Services are highlighting? How seriously should we be taking this?
So there's two ways to parse that question. Are there real dangers to the pharmaceutical industry, and are there real dangers to the American public? I think those are two very different and very important separate questions.
Well, let's start with the dangers to the public first.
Yeah, I agree. That's what matters. The industry, they'll do just fine one way or another, but it's a question of the public. So Does the public face real dangers associated with vaccination? Just as a baseline, all drugs have toxicity. Water has toxicity in sufficient doses. The question with any drug, whether it's a chemotherapeutic, it's a immune enhancing nutritional supplement, or anything in between, is what is the benefit and what is the risk? And I think that the American public deserves to have transparent information about both those things. How do we understand or think about what the potential benefits are? That relates to what is the indication. I'm throwing a lot of fancy regulatory jargon here, forgive me, but it's the world I live in. So indication is to say, what are you going to use it for? Because if you're going to use it to treat your cancer, and you have a very high probability of dying from your cancer, and you already have that disease, that's a totally different situation than you're just merrily bopping along your life at 45 and you want to do everything you can to maximize your health or build muscle or whatever it is that floats your boat, and you're otherwise healthy. So those are two completely different situations. One where you have a severe disease, and one where you're looking forward and trying to maintain good health. And of course, there's everything in between. And in the case of vaccines, here's the kicker, and I'm talking about prophylactic vaccines. There's also therapeutic vaccines. This kind of bundling vaccines as a thing is not a useful way to approach the issues, let's say. I could think of stronger words. But in the case of prophylactic vaccines, more fancy regulatory words, that means vaccines that you take when you don't have a disease. Because there's also cancer vaccines, and those are potentially therapeutic. Now, that hasn't worked out so well, and that relates to some other things we may talk about later. But in the history of cancer vaccines is long. It goes back to at least the 40s and has had a tortuous history. But prophylactic vaccines, in other words, taking something to prevent an illness, an infectious disease illness in particular, goes back to ancient China, when they would scrape the lesions off of the smallpox pustules that had developed. They would scrape the crust off of those and put them in a straw and blow them into the nose of the person being inoculated. That's actually also the earliest example of a mucosal vaccine. Of course, we have the more modern cases of Jenner and cowpox, et cetera, and then everything up to the present. But in the case of prophylactic vaccines in general, you're taking them, or your child is taking them, to prevent something at a time when your child is otherwise healthy. Now, in some cases, some people may want to receive a vaccine product, say tetanus, in which they have had an insult that puts them at high risk for a disease, and maybe they already have the disease. So that's an example. But in most cases, you're taking a product where you're healthy or your child is healthy. Now, what that equates to in terms of medical ethics is kind of two key factors. One is, it darn well better be safe, because your child currently does not have a disease. And the last thing you want as a physician, as a pediatrician, as any responsible medical care provider, you don't want to be giving somebody something that at some frequency may cause them to have a disease or a harm that they otherwise didn't have and wouldn't potentially never have had. So that's the issue that makes prophylactic vaccines pretty unique, is they have to be super, super safe. Because even if we're talking about, let's say, measles, okay? And what's the probability of having hospitalization or death from measles? It's actually quite low. There's the infamous Brady Bunch episode where they're talking about having a measles party. Historically, there was chickenpox parties when I was of that age, et cetera, et cetera. So is measles really that much of a risk in the current era when you have antibiotics? Remember that antibiotics kind of transformed the whole risk-benefit ratio for everything having to do with infectious disease. So in the case of measles, it's an insanely infectious virus. It is at its peak. COVID was at its peak infectivity. COVID was just hitting, the technical term is R naught, the coefficient of replication in a human population. It was just hitting where measles is. Measles is crazy infectious, but you generally don't die of it. Very rare to have measles deaths. So the measles vaccine is generally safe. There are adverse events associated with measles vaccination. I don't know of any deaths associated with measles vaccination. There may well be. It's about 75 and sometimes less protective from infection, which means that something like 25 to 30% of people that get a normal exposure to measles during a measles outbreak that are vaccinated will get measles. Okay, so it isn't completely protective. And in the recent West Texas measles outbreak, we had a number of people who were unvaccinated who developed measles. And we also had a bunch of people that were previously vaccinated, and the industry calls these breakthrough cases. So in the case of measles, the vaccine is generally considered safe, and relative to the risk of the disease measles is considered currently by the ACIP and the CDC and the various pediatric associations and medical associations to have a favorable risk benefit. The risk of you getting measles is tiny, tiny, but the risk of you getting a post-vaccination injury is also very small. And the risk that you're going to get exposed to measles is also very small. So on balance, it's considered to be favorable, but not really critical in terms of providing for longevity for your child. Now, there are other vaccines that address diseases that can have a very significant impact on the health of your children. Mumps is mentioned from time to time. What's the risk associated with mumps disease? It's mostly orchitis, which can lead to reduced or infertility in the male, in your young boy. And so that's part of what's used to justify the mumps vaccine. But is mumps generally lethal? Absolutely not. Now, let's take the other extreme. Ebola. Ebola is a nasty, wicked disease. It kills you, and it not only kills you, it kills you in a very ugly fashion, where you're bleeding out of most orifices, and it's just an absolutely miserable death. It is absolutely, I can tell you, having been at the forefront and at the WHO multiple times during the initial West African Ebola outbreak, Ebola drives people absolutely crazy. They will do stuff. They will use automatic weapons to kill people with Ebola, to keep them quarantined. They lose their minds over Ebola. And by the way the Ebola outbreak was largely contained eventually wasn't due to vaccination. It wasn't due to therapeutics. Remdesivir was tried, didn't work. Matter of fact, killed more people than it saved. That's another story. But the thing that kind of quenched that was when it was realized that the locals had a practice, basically a religious practice, historically, of gathering the family and friends around the corpse that was laid in state of a deceased person within the typically village. Okay, so you would have the typical practice is that you would respect the dead, your elders or whomever, by coming around and having what we might call a wake here in the West. And that would involve touching and kissing of the corpse. The problem is that Ebola sheds on the skin and is very stable on the skin. And so they would do that, they would touch and kiss, and then they would get infected, and you can figure out it's like a nuclear reaction, a chain reaction. So when that was realized, and they were able to penetrate, and that was another problem, is the lack of faith in public health in West Africa due to other things that have happened historically. You know, there were teams that were stoned to death. But when they were able to penetrate into those villages, teach them that they had to change that practice, they needed to burn the bodies as soon as possible, not touching them. That is what quenched the outbreak. But in the context of that, in a very unusual clinical design, there was the development and eventual approval of an Ebola vaccine. So that Ebola vaccine that I helped spearhead, that was initially developed by Public Health Agency Canada, is a nasty, reactogenic, wicked vaccine. Likewise, the yellow fever vaccine is essentially an attenuated yellow fever. And there's notorious stories from Brazil of the locals, they have yellow fever vaccination campaigns when they have an outbreak. And there's stories of locals that would get their jab and then get back in line because they figured one's good, two's better. Don't go there. These are folks that come out of the jungle. They're not, haven't had the benefit of your education. So 2 doses of of yellow fever vaccine can kill you, and does in some instances. The Ebola vaccine is a recombinant vesiculostomatitis virus that is a virus that causes brain encephalopathy and a lot of other symptoms. And when you take it, you feel, I'll just say bad. It is highly reactogenic. Your muscles hurt, your joints hurt, your head hurts, everything hurts. And Médecins Sans Frontières physicians and medical care providers during the West African outbreak would not go back to West Africa after they came out unless they got that vaccine, because no matter how bad that vaccine was, getting Ebola was a lot worse. So I like to say if COVID had been like Ebola, people would have been lining around the block, like a Star Wars release, to get that vaccine, like they did back in the day with smallpox vaccine. So a lot of range in vaccines, risk benefit, and I think that the other key thing I want to emphasize is that historically, we could talk about the Hippocratic Oath, but frankly, that's a bit outdated. It's an artifact that nobody really pays attention to, but except for those that are graduating from medical school. And even that is now being transformed into woke language by various medical schools. But more relevant is the modern discipline of medical ethics as it's been developed basically post-World War II in the Nuremberg trials. And one of the key principles there is the rights of the patient, and it's very individual focused. It's not the rights of the collective, it's not the rights of the society, it's not the rights of the state, it's the rights of the individual, because of course under the Nazi regime, a lot of what happened in terms of experimentation on prisoners and ethnic minorities, etc., that was all justified as necessary by the state to do things like inform risk management for soldiers that would be stationed on the Russian front or in towards the Arctic Circle. So they did a lot of really obscene experimentation on captive individuals without their consent, involving exposure to cold. So I don't need to belabor the Nuremberg trials. Physicians were hung, and they were hung based on the Western consensus among the Allied forces that experimentation on individuals without consent, without full informed consent, was unethical to such extent that those people that practiced that deserved to have the ultimate punishment. That was the decision back then. Since there's been the Belmont Report, Helsinki Accord, all kinds of things that have built a modern discipline of medical ethics. And that discipline, among other things, emphasizes the rights of the individual and the importance of informed consent. Informed consent means that you, as the caretaker of a child, or as a person able to give informed consent independently, must have the information in a format that you can comprehend, not in pharma medical speak. You have to be able to understand the information in a simple way concerning what the potential risks and benefits are of that procedure, medical procedure. And Alex, you're a young lad still compared to myself. And just to illustrate the point, I hope this isn't too gross. When I went in for my colonoscopy, the surgeon went through explicitly what the risks and benefits were associated with colonoscopy. That is the same for any medical procedure, any surgical procedure. It is the norm in American medicine, and yet for some reason it's not the norm in the case of vaccines. One of the other key principles is that basically, I'm going to state this using biblical language, thou shalt not coerce, entice, or compel anybody to receive a medical procedure without informed consent. And in fact, coercion and enticement and compulsion were key characteristics of the COVID response. The ice creams or hamburgers given out or whatever, that's enticement. The harassment of the unvaccinated, well, that is coercion. And the mandates are compulsion, just to kind of give practical examples. And according to modern medical ethics, 20th century medical ethics, none of that is acceptable, particularly in the case of an experimental product, which is by definition what an emergency use authorization confers, is an experimental product. So one could make the case that in the context of vaccination, it is hypercritical that parents and adults, adolescents that are of an age determined that they can make their own medical decisions, have full access to risks. In most cases, for instance, in oncology, if with a particular drug, there have been case reports of things like delayed death, that's listed. That's included in the disclosure. Now, the person that is, and this is considered to be an incorrect use of the language, to say that the verb consenting someone is not considered proper, and yet it's used all over the industry. So when if I was to be running a clinical trial on a new drug and I wanted to, I'm as a principal investigator, I would need to consent the participants. I would read a document that lists all of the potential adverse events down to the level of rare adverse events that are of serious consequence, like, say, deferred onset of a different type of cancer or death. All of those would be listed, And then I would have a Q&A, an active discussion where the patient would ask me, or the enrolled subject in a clinical trial would ask me, well, what about this thing? What about that thing? What's the risk there? Now, in the world of ACIP, the term of art that's used for this is called joint decision making. ACIP and the CDC have their own special language for many things. So joint decision making is when a pediatrician, for example, engages with the parent to discuss the risks for the child, and there is a joint decision informed by the physician but made by the caretaker, the guardian or parent, to accept or reject the product. Pediatricians hate that. Medical care systems hate that. Insurance companies hate that. And the reason why is because we now live, and this relates to some of the other topics that we're going to talk about later on in terms of the vectors of medicine towards this brave new world that's envisioned for all of us. The reason is because in the modern medical system that's basically driven by insurance and large corporations, physicians are typically given, it depends, 5 to 10 minutes per patient interaction. So Johnny comes in, you do the examination, you talk to mom, there's your 10 minutes. You don't have time to go through an elaborate discussion about risks and benefits of whether or not Johnny is going to get this, that, or the other vaccine, or all three together. And what the parent thinks about that, and whether the parent thinks that it should be deferred or until a later date or when Johnny's healthy or whatever the thing is. They want, the system wants, protocol-driven medicine based on clear objective criteria that are derived from population-based statistical analysis. So the world that your pediatrician lives in, unless it's an unusual pediatrician, is one in which he has a protocol, and this often is the CDC vaccine schedule in this case. And he's able to, or computationally, it's loaded into his computer, and his nurse has done this beforehand, said, oh, this is Johnny's 9-month visit, and at 9 months, Johnny should get ABC, because that's what the CDC recommends, and therefore that is the standard of care. And so we don't have to have a discussion. Pediatrician walks in, says, it's a 9-month visit, and Johnny's going to get these 3 jabs, and that's the way it is. And if mom objects, then we get into a whole thing of, well, and this is increasingly common in many pediatric offices, if you're not going to accept what is the standard of care, then I'm going to have to fire you from my practice. And that has to do with both the financial incentives as well as the legal ones, because now Johnny is no longer on track with the accepted standard of care. And if we go to shared decision-making on vaccine X, Y, or Z, then all of that goes out the door. And then the physician has to document that there has been a discussion, that all the proper information has been shared, and that mother made a decision for Johnny to accept or reject this product. And that, furthermore, if the product is not recommended for Johnny because he doesn't have, let's get down to specifics, the COVID vaccine, if Johnny doesn't have one high risk factor, whatever a high risk factor is yet to be determined, we'll talk about at the next ACIP what that means. But if Johnny is totally healthy and isn't obese or diabetic or whatever the risk factor is, for the pediatrician to recommend that Johnny, maybe Johnny's mom comes in and she says, I really want Johnny to get a COVID jab. I just think this is the right thing to do. Maybe she's wearing a mask as she comes in and says it. The pediatrician at that point would have to say, well, it's not the standard of care because Johnny's perfectly healthy and has essentially a zero risk of death or significant hospitalization from COVID. This was just emphasized in a Washington Post article the other day, incredulously. Oh my God, COVID deaths in children remain extremely low, as if this was a crisis. But that's the context, is then the pediatrician for Johnny, who has no risk factors, would have to write a prescription for mom to go get Johnny vaccinated or to get vaccinated in the office. Increasingly, pediatricians are not carrying the COVID vaccine. And if Johnny was to develop myocarditis or myopericarditis or something even worse, that physician could then be challenged in terms of a lawsuit for medical malpractice because he wrote a prescription for Johnny to get a product that was not advised by the CDC to be given to Johnny. This is why Elizabeth Warren is in such a tizzy that Bobby has restricted vaccine access. And Bobby came back in last week's testimony saying, well, Senator Warren, do you advise that we should be giving children vaccine products for which we have no clinical data and there's no clear indication? That, Senator Warren just kind of continued hammering away because she was just seeking a soundbite, not actually engaging in an intellectual interchange or trying to comprehend. But that's kind of to give a flavor of where we're at and what's been going on. And then we have this Federal Advisory Committee, FACA Act, Federal Advisory Committee Act, that happens to be called the ACIP, or the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that, as Senator Blumenthal said to me yesterday evening, well, you set vaccine policy at the ACIP. Well, and I said, no, Senator, that's not what we do. I've read the charter for the ACIP, and that is not the mission of the ACIP. The mission of the ACIP is to serve as a completely independent advisory commission to the director of the CDC. And if we have no director of the CDC, that now has to be confirmed by the Senate with their infinite wisdom, then that vests up the food chain, as would normally happen in any organizational structure. And who does the director of the CDC report to? Well, they report to the assistant secretary or the secretary of HHS. Now, at the moment, the assistant secretary for HHS is the acting director of CDC. But I suspect that any recommendations are going to flow up to Bobby. But ACIP does not set vaccine policy. In fact, what's happened is that functionally, there's a lot of talk yesterday at the hearing, Ron Johnson's hearing, that the ACIP has been captured by the pharmaceutical industry. Personally, I object to that, and I want to write that in an essay today, I think, when we get through this podcast. But I think the capture that has occurred, from what I'm observing, first person, is that the ACIP has been captured by CDC bureaucrats and personnel. What's happened over time to this committee that's supposed to be entirely independent is that the CDC personnel have asserted the right to set the agendas and to basically have veto power over who gets selected to participate in the working group subcommittees, which is where all the business gets done. And those are absolutely closed door. And they're required to be closed door based on the Congressional FACA Act. It's not something nefarious. It is in the law. And so what's happened is that the bureaucrats in CDC, and CDC absolutely has a vaccine cult mentality. That is something that has to be broken. And Bobby is very aware of that. The logic is they believe that they're, to phrase it another way, they believe they're doing God's work. They truly believe that every person should have these products. And that by insisting that every person have these products, which are marketed as safe and effective, they are saving lives. They're on a mission. They're like missionaries. They believe they're saving lives. And saving lives requires suppression of any information that would cause vaccine hesitancy. Because informed consent and full disclosure of vaccine risks might lead some people to not accept the product. Now, one of the topics you wanted to cover today was the decision by my good friend Joe Ladapo, the Surgeon General for the state of Florida, MD, PhD, trained at Harvard. I think he's, or maybe he's an MD, MPH, trained at Harvard, both degrees. Previously a professor, full professor at UCLA. That Ron DeSantis grabbed out of UCLA and plopped into this position as Surgeon General for the state of Florida. And Joe has had the courage and temerity to assert that the state of Florida, and the governor agreed, will no longer mandate through its school system or otherwise vaccine uptake into the pediatric population. And of course, the response has been the sky is falling, there's going to be polio and measles and God only knows what else, and the plagues will descend on the people of Florida consequent to this decision. So let's unpack that just for a moment, because it kind of illustrates the whole thing. Sweden does not have any pediatric vaccine mandates. They don't have vaccine mandates at all. Yet they have well over 90% uptake of vaccines in their pediatric population, and an extremely low rate compared to other Northern European countries of pediatric infectious disease. What's the difference? Number one, does it mean the sky is going to fall in the state of Florida because Joe Ladapo said no more mandates? Well, no, obviously. That's hyperbole. Okay, so what is it that makes it so that Sweden has this vaccine uptake and the United States, with its mandates, has a much lower rate of vaccine uptake despite all of the propaganda and push from the CDC? What's the difference? The difference is that people in Sweden trust their public health service. They trust their government. And so all of this language that we're hearing promoted by corporate media, or I like to call it dead media, thanks to my wife, because it's dying on the vine, and that gets into the issue of the pharmaceutical advertising, which is another part of the MAHA agenda. But what has caused vaccine hesitancy and driven vaccine hesitancy and resistance in the United States is the very policies that are being pursued by the CDC, the use of propaganda, nudge technology, blacklisting, and gaslighting, professional gaslighting, crowd stalking by CDC-funded Shots Heard Around the World program through the Public Good Projects. Who doesn't want public good? So that is what is driving vaccine hesitancy, is the lack of trust in the government, and in particular the federal public health system, which, by the way, constitutionally has no right to regulate the practice of healthcare. That right vests to the states. And so then you ask the question, well, what the heck is the FDA and the CDC doing? Well, the FDA in particular inserts itself into this due to the Commerce Clause, because the Commerce Clause in the Constitution vests the right to the federal government to regulate interstate commerce. And so technically, FDA's authority entirely flows from the fact that drugs are marketed and shipped interstate. Other than that, if you set up a compounding pharmacy in the state of Florida and you start producing GLP-1 inhibitors that aren't otherwise licensed, just to take one example, yeah, you would get sued by the people that make the GLP-1 inhibitors, but you can have ways around that. But could the FDA shut you down? As soon as you ship it across state boundaries, absolutely. But if you market it and ship it within the state of Florida, they really don't have any jurisdiction. And the CDC doesn't really have any jurisdiction over any of this. They act through surrogates. And the surrogates include the various medical societies. Now, here's where pharma has corrupted things. Pharma, as well documented and noted recently by Secretary Kennedy, has made major donations to virtually every single medical, we call them guild, specialty organization, whatever you wish. And so, for instance, in the case of the ACIP, to bring it right back down to that again, historically, the members of the ACIP have almost entirely been drawn from the medical societies, and the members of the working groups have been almost entirely drawn from the medical societies. So what is it going to take to be put up by the medical society as a candidate for one of these slots? Well, you kind of need to go along to get along. You have to be with the program, and that means you have to be aligned with the interests of the pharmaceutical industry, and that's where that happens. Now, I've talked for probably half an hour now, Alex, on one single question, so I'm going to shut up and let you ask the next one.
Life's just better with VNI. There's purpose, there's passion, and there's a renewed sense of inspiration and optimism with every day. After all, we were founded on the power of possibility. Nearly a decade ago, a team of world-class scientists, formulators, and industry makers brought together biology, chemistry, and technology and created something unique and life-changing, while infusing a new sense of health and hope into the world. With every product comes an empowering opportunity to take charge of our destiny. One where we feel rejuvenated and energized, and everything else around us feels lighter, brighter, and full of promise. Let's live victoriously, together.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malone, and this is fascinating stuff. Really excited to have kind of some insight into what's going on with the ACIP. This, I think, is on a lot of minds, especially a lot of parents' minds, so thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I really want to talk to you about, and I know you have spent a lot of time kind of in this world, is the future of medicine, the future of mRNA technology, the intersection with artificial intelligence, and even this push for transhumanism. Yes, the COVID vaccine seems to have soured a lot of people on the whole technology. In fact, Donald Trump just, for the first time on September 1st, posted that he's got some concerns about whether the Operation Warp Speed was really as great as he was told that it was. So we're now seeing this coming down all the way from the top. But where is all of this going, Dr. Malone? We just had Bill Gates at the White House talking about the future of genetic editing technology. And I think for a lot of people who haven't studied this, it sounds like bad science fiction, and yet these technologies are real. You know, you've worked on them. You understand them, I think, better than almost anybody. Where are we going with this ability to manipulate genetic codes and artificial intelligence now being plugged into every element of our healthcare system?
Okay, Alex, let me start by OWS, Operation Warp Speed, because you've referenced the president's statements. And my opinion is a little bit nuanced on that. As somebody that's worked intensively with the government over much of my career, particularly with the Department of Defense, but also BARDA and NIH, there is a long history of siloing and infighting between government agencies. A whole lot of that's my cheese, not yours. I lived it. I lost my job at Dynport Vaccine Company because Tony Fauci came in and took over the DoD budget for biodefense because the DoD was blamed for the anthrax attacks, the spore attacks. And so clearly the DoD couldn't be trusted, and Tony Fauci could. We know how that played out. But that's the historic context within which, in his first administration, presented with what was presented to him as a healthcare crisis, an infectious disease crisis. And at the time, the information that was being promoted, it was false information based on modeling coming out of London, School of Tropical Hygiene, was that there would be 3 to 4% case fatality rate. What that means, just to translate the medical buzzwords, is out of every 100 people that got infected with COVID, between 3 and 4 would die. That's what case fatality rate means. Now, that was very quickly proven to be false, in particular with actual data as opposed to modeling, by one Dr. J. Bhattacharya that did some interesting work out on the West Coast in Palo Alto, where he kind of blew that whole narrative open and then got attacked for it. But that was what President Trump was confronted with: 3 to 4% case fatality rate, and no clear answers about what to do about it. No drugs, no vaccines, and people like me saying the history of coronavirus vaccines have been atrocious. And the probability is that if you try to jam through a vaccine, what you're going to end up with is something that's actually going to create a greater risk of disease. Now, what is that? Just to read forward, a greater risk of disease, the fancy terminology for that in the context of vaccination is negative efficacy. That means you take the product, and at some period of time after you take it, you become more likely to develop the disease than if you never took it in the first place. And there are many studies that assert that that's the case beginning at about 3 to 6 months after you receive the product, which is part of the motivation for why the frequent boosters. Reeling back, though, to that point in time in 2020, I knew about it in January 2020. The White House kind of got situational awareness in March of 2020. And then, to his credit, the president and his advisors pulled together a all-of-government response to this public health crisis. And they actually made it work. Now, a lot of people criticize what went down. I criticize some of the contracting methods that were used. But it was considered to be a major public health crisis, and we were going to lose 3 to 4% of all Americans from this if we didn't do something. And so they pulled together, and they actually got the civilian side and the military side to play nice in the sandbox, together with industry, and drive this forward as a organizational moment. For the likes of you and I complain about the government not ever being able to get anything done. They got this done. Now, the work product, I disagree with. The work product, I disagree with the policies about how the work product was deployed. I disagree with the interpretation of the safety and effectiveness of the work product. But as a process, it was clearly demonstrated that it was possible under good leadership to get the government to actually get something done on an enormously short timeline. And whether this was the right way to do it, and throwing the rule book away in terms of regulatory affairs vaccines, was that so wise? In retrospect, probably not. But it got done. So kudos to President Trump for Operation Warp Speed. Does it deserve the Nobel Prize? I'm sorry, Bourla and senators, but the Nobel Prize Committee, as anybody that knows anything is aware, does not give out the prize twice. The prize was given to Carrico and Weissman. I disagree. I think that it should have been given to the team in the University of British Columbia that developed the formulation technology and delivery technology. And I certainly don't want to have my name associated with this particular product, so I'm okay with that. But if you're going to give it for enabling these vaccines, it goes to University of British Columbia, not to Carrico and Weissman. But that's history. It's done. Donald Trump is not going to get a Nobel Prize for the Operation Warp Speed and his work product, the COVID-19 vaccine. That is just propaganda that's being promoted. Now, where is all this going? Which is your bigger question. My intention as a mid-20-something physician scientist in training had been to become a pediatrician focused on the use of retroviral vectors, because I had a strong background in retrovirology, for curing inborn errors of metabolism, in other words, genetic diseases in children. That's what I wanted to do. It was my passion. That's the whole reason why I was at the Salk. And all of this RNA stuff and non-viral delivery was just a spin out of what I was trying to do, and an unfortunate one because it set me so far out of the mainstream that all kinds of other blowback happened to me. But that's where I wanted to go. Point is, I reach back in terms of memory and experience to Ted Friedman, who is the person at UC San Diego who originally conceived of the idea of gene therapy for pediatric inborn errors of metabolism. Now, as I discovered at the Salk, by observing the work of Dan St. Louis and his frustration in developing gene therapy using a mouse model, the problem with the gene therapy concept is that your body doesn't know that it's a good gene that's being administered. It just knows that it's a different gene, immunologically. And so your body will reject the gene and any cells that are producing it that may be the good copy of the cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulatory protein or the dystrophin protein associated with muscular dystrophy. It doesn't know that those are the good things and it should save them. It just knows that they're different and it rejects them, which basically, with that realization, the whole house of cards of gene therapy collapsed. Now, why is that relevant to your question? Because it reads forward into the present. We talk about using Cas9 and CRISPR and other technologies to genetically edit people's, let's say somatic cells. It's a whole different ball of wax when you're manipulating the germline, when you're manipulating sperm or egg, or the initial embryo, because the process of education of the immune system hasn't started yet. But that's a whole nother thing. I mean, one of the paradoxes here is we have two simultaneous narratives. One is we have overpopulation. Oh my God, we shouldn't have so many people born. We have to have abortion, right? And, oh, isn't this technology cool? We can save children in utero that are otherwise going to be born with a genetic defect by using a multi-million-dollar procedure on the fetus of a high net worth individual, because that's kind of what it comes down to. Because the likes of you and I are not, or our wives are not the ones that are going to be queued up for receiving a $10 million procedure. So it makes no sense. If you just go back to basics, editing the human genome as something that you do to an adult or a mature being that has been delivered and has a functional immune system, doesn't work because of the functional immune system. The only way you can make it work is by suppressing their immune response, which is akin to transplantation. So you get all the problems of transplantation and marginal benefit. And in the case of germline manipulation, that's a whole ethical ball of wax. You know, do we want heritable mutations in humans to make it so that you have whatever the characteristic is? And generally, we have so many humans on the population and so much genetic variability in those humans that whether you attribute it to the creator or the creator plus natural selection or natural selection, you know, depending on where you're at, it's still, none of this makes sense from a fundamental biologic standpoint. It's a case of people that are infatuated with technology. And I just, having been in this world now for, I guess it's about 40 years now, I've seen these arguments go round and around and around, and I've seen the startups again and again and again that use this pump and dump scheme where they entice investors about the prospect we're going to cure, fill in the blank, cancer, inborn errors of metabolism, whatever the thing is, because we have this cool new widget that's never been tried before. And it's easy to spin up excitement, if nothing else, from the momentum traders. And so you end up as a small, startup, or whether you're mid-size or whatever, you're hyping this new tech. You pull in cash. You start to work on that, but it doesn't work out so well. And so basically, you make an announcement to your investors. I'm sorry, we're going to redirect our efforts. And you basically swallow the money, and everybody gets a really hefty six-figure salary until their retirement. Typically we're talking about $500,000 a year for the top leaders in most of these little startups. And the investors get fleeced again and again and again because biology is really complex. And we don't understand it. We really don't understand the immune system. Just like we don't understand the brain. And by the way, the immune system is derived from the same tissue as the brain. So in terms of the, let's say, threat vector of genetic engineering, here's the skinny on that. Delivery of genetic information into your body is extremely challenging, technically. We're all amazed at what's happened with the RNA vaccines. The truth is that that system, despite all the adverse events that are being observed associated with it and the risks of DNA fragment contamination, etc., it's incredibly inefficient. We all often think that, well, you take this product and you have RNA everywhere in your body. Well, technically that's true. But that is not the same as saying the majority of cells in your body have received this product. Okay? It's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of cells that become the manufacturing facilities for producing spike protein in this case. Thank God, because otherwise we would blow up, basically, as our cellular immune system starts attacking our whole body. That would be a massive autoimmune disease in every single person that took the vaccine. It doesn't happen. Okay? So until they solve how do we get the genetic information into your cells problem, a lot of this is just going to be hype and marketing. Why is it so hard to get genetic information into our cells? Because we have been bombarded as living cellular-based organisms for millennia by parasitic genetic information coming from a variety of sources, not the least of which is what we call viruses. That's what viruses are, is they're basically genetic parasites, whether RNA or DNA. And so we've got all kinds of mechanisms to keep those darn things out. And you have to overcome all of that in order to get that stuff in. And it just doesn't work very well. So do I perceive this as a threat? No. Other than diversion of funds from things that could be used more productively. Will we see periodic claims of miracle cures or benefits? Yes. When you see that, just process in your mind, are they really addressing a real problem at a price point and availability that's going to make a real impact? Or is this just another storyline in order to generate investment capital from Wall Street and excitement from the New York Post or the Wall Street Journal? And I think usually it's the latter. Or, most notoriously Wired magazine, which seems to have strong links with the intelligence community and just loves to pump technology. They called, back in the day, the little company that I was employee number 10 at, Vical, that actually did first make the mRNA vaccines work, they called it the next Microsoft. Announced it with great, sincerity that, and the implication was that investors better get in on this thing quick or they're going to miss out just like they missed out on Microsoft. Well, Vical sucked up about $3 billion in investment capital and never produced a single product, but the CEO has a very nice place in La Jolla. So that's how this all plays. Now, they're talking about the future of mRNA tech. My original concept, when I was 28, forgive me, okay? I was different then than I am now. But remember, I was in arguably the top gene therapy lab in the world, a laboratory that had produced 4 Nobel laureates, one of which is the recently deceased David Baltimore. I was working for the guy who was trained by David Baltimore and supported the thing that David Baltimore got the Nobel Prize for on the bench. I was at the very cutting edge. And I was a true believer in gene therapy. I thought that, as I said, I was going to be on track, and every hospital would have some doc that would be treating genetic disease with gene therapy technology, and I wanted to be one of those docs. And that's not who I am now. I'm much older and wiser, as they say. But that was me then. And when I realized that RNA could be used as a drug, which is a radical idea at the time, something that I was ridiculed for. The Salk filed a patent and then abandoned it because it was not commercializable. It was a crazy idea. Nobody could possibly make RNA like that, and it wasn't even worth investing. Merck bought the rights and basically pocket vetoed them for about a decade, which is why there's this big gap in RNA vaccine development, by the way, is because Merck basically put it on the back burner and wouldn't let anybody else work on it. So you have a way to use RNA as a drug. What are you going to do with it? Well, it doesn't work very good. What could you use it for? Well, it turns out that the immune system will amplify a signal. You only need a little bit of protein expression for the immune system to respond to that and generate an adaptive immune response, cellular and humoral. So, the low-hanging fruit, using a Silicon Valley term for investors, associated with this idea of RNA as drug was use it for a vaccine. Simple. That is it. That is the genesis of this. Now, the devil's in the details. We started working with cationic lipids at Vical, and because of a problematic chemist who insisted that we were not doing proper science and that we needed to do better controls. Heard this narrative before, like in the context of vaccines and CDC? So this chemist insisted that we weren't doing good science, we weren't using proper negative controls, and so to prove him wrong, I developed a panel of blinded samples that I sent off to University of Wisconsin for injection into rats that included naked RNA and naked DNA. It started off just as naked RNA, no cationic lipids, no lipid nanoparticle formulation. Lo and behold, the data came back. The principal investigator there, John Wolfe, at the other end of the line, said, well, my postdoc must have screwed up because the sample that got no cationic lipids, that was just naked RNA, produced more protein than the other ones. We better do this experiment again. And that led to a science paper that was a huge breakthrough, thousands and thousands of citations, was ridiculed, but turned out to be true, readily reproduced, that naked RNA and DNA could directly deliver information into cells. And it was the naked RNA that was used to reduce it to practice at Vical, not a cationic lipid. So there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, and once you started adding in the cationic lipids, the problem was that they became very toxic. And the group at University of British Columbia thought they had partially solved that, asserted that they had a particular widget, a formulation method, that made it so that when you put it in your shoulder, it only went to the draining lymph nodes, didn't go to the rest of the body. That all turned out to be false. But that was the claim then, and now we know that these formulations are toxic. They harm people in a variety of different ways. So what can you do about it? Well, like any other drug, one thing you can do is to reduce the dose. How do you reduce the dose? Well, one way you can do it is by using self-replicating RNA. So a tiny amount of RNA gets into your cell and then it makes more copies of itself. How are you going to do that? Well, that technology has been in development at the Karolinska, for example, people that award the Nobel Prize, for decades, based on another virus called alpha viruses. Alpha viruses cause brain inflammation, among other things. But this has now been advanced to the point where you have viable self-replicating RNAs. They're kind of like a virus, but not. They don't spread, hopefully, unless it's through exosomes, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But the thesis is that by using self-replicating RNA, you can greatly reduce the dose so you don't get the toxicity associated with the lipid nanoparticle as bad. And then once the RNA gets into the cell, it produces more of itself and it produces more protein and voila. So you ask the question, what's the current cutting edge in mRNA tech? The next generation that's being advanced is these self-replicating RNAs. And they're being combined with other delivery methods because remember, that's the core problem, is how do you make something work better than naked RNA? And so, for instance, in the case of these COVID jabs, if one was really doing science, remembering back to Raj Kumar, the infamous scientist at Vical that I was mentioning a moment ago, he, by the way, got run out of the company and now, last I heard, runs a muffler shop in San Diego. But that's how it is with science. And so if Carrico and Weissman and Operation Warp Speed were to have had Raj Kumar sitting in one of these management program sessions, he might have said, well, where's the negative control of the RNA alone? Do we really know that these products are better than just that? And of course, everybody would have said, you fool, of course that doesn't matter. But if we were doing good science, we would have done that. So we still don't know whether RNA in humans, in a naked form, at these kinds of doses, can produce a significant immune response. So that's an open issue. Improvement in delivery, improvement in biologic activity, this kind of I like to say, if you give a 3-year-old a hammer, if you're a parent, you would never do that because you know what would happen. If you give a 3-year-old a hammer, everything becomes a nail, is the metaphor. And that's kind of the case with this RNA vaccine tech, is this belief that, well, this is cool, and let's just try it for everything. There are hundreds of clinical trials right now for every indication under the sun because from the pharmaceutical industry standpoint, it's a gold rush. It is literally the metaphor of a gold rush is accurate because this is an entirely new composition of matter. So the patent landscape is wide open, particularly since this guy that nobody knows about and everybody thinks is a conspiracy theorist back in '87 claimed and filed the documents about this idea of the use of mRNA as a drug and advanced it in a series of patents that are now expired, many of which are behind my head here, from this company Vical that never managed to make a product. All that basic intellectual property is wide open. The patents have expired. I got $1 US, just Susan B. Anthony dollar, just to be clear on that, for the acquisition of whatever rights I had, and the Salk dropped the other patent. And now it's wide open. So if you are company X and you come up with a new composition of matter having to do with how you formulate it or how you modify it, pseudouridine or modified pseudouridine, or how you administer it or the payload, or all those things, you can get a patent around that. So you can now build a product around this new composition of matter for virtually anything with all kinds of new nuances. It's very much like the early days of Edison and electricity, or if you've seen this recent film series about the origins of moving pictures and all that happened there. it's a land rush. And so where's that going to go? We're going to see all kinds of applications, new clinical trials, indications, sales pitches and propaganda, and assertions that we can do things like fix the God gene that humans have that makes them prone towards. I mean, this has been floated. This is not me just saying this out of the blue. There are people who assert that there is some genetic basis for acceptance of fundamental principles in theology, and that we can correct that bad characteristic, apparently, under this logic, through genetic modification. But think through what I said. The probability that there is going to be a delivery system that is going to correct those genes, if we want to call it correction, or let's say modify those genes, because we want to enable some new superhuman, the only way you could possibly do that is in the germline. So that's messing around with embryos, ova, and semen, sperm, which turns out to be problematic, but that tech is well developed, actually, and it's routinely used in mice, among other things. And cloning is routinely used now with a variety of mammals. You can buy a cloned horse or sheep or whatever it is that, if you have enough money, floats your boat. So can we say that there won't be genetic superhumans? I suspect that there will be at some point in time. The militaries of the world, and we've written on this in our Substack, believe that this is like mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons. Well, those guys are doing it, so we got to do it, because otherwise we're going to get behind those guys, and there we have it. That is absolutely what's going on, and the finger is usually pointed at the CCP. Does the CCP do high-risk human research that most of us would disagree with? Yes. So is this going to happen at some point? Yes. Are we going to see, is it a significant threat? I don't know. It hasn't developed yet. Anything that can be weaponized, I think this should be a new axiom. Maybe we'll call it Malone's Law. Anything that can be weaponized will be weaponized, right? And in this internal quest for dominance and power. And one of those revolves around the idea of immortality. Now I'm branching off to transhumanism. So this is where we get the issues around organ harvesting, for instance, in the recent Reuters live mic clip that the CCP has forced Reuters to take down between Xi and Putin having a casual conversation about organ harvesting and transplantation, like they're talking about the price of eggs, and that this can be used to extend life until at least approximately 150 years. All of this thrust vector of transhumanism, the idea of creating a digital avatar based on abstracting basically your soul through your various communications on media and social media and every other channel and your actions, and then uploading that virtual avatar onto the web to create some version of yourself that will live forever, or that Alex Newman could potentially tap into the artificial intelligence rendering program for Dr. Robert Malone, his voice, I already used the voice cloning, and face, to generate a video, and everything that Dr. Malone has ever said, thought, or done, or bought at the grocery store is in a big database that will predict what Dr. Malone would say to the next question that Alex Newman asks him. Is that going to happen? It's pretty much already here. And does that mean that Dr. Malone is going to live forever on the internet? Come on, guys. There's this thing called the soul. And they may think that they're extracting some version of the soul, and Yuval Harari may deny the existence of a soul. But for most of us, we know it's there. It's not something that science can measure. So the transhumanism logic is all seemingly wrapped around two key arguments. Human beings have done a horrible job managing the environment and the globe, and they need to stop it, and we need to give that right to manage affairs to essentially the machines. And number two, the machines now need to, they may find it useful to maintain a certain amount of wet humans in order to service them. So that's digital slavery, I guess. But beyond that, you might want to have them as pets like a poodle, but they're really not going to be contributing because all the machines are going to have exceptional intelligence. Now, whether or not these natural language processing programs actually represent intelligence is a different thing. They certainly don't, they can mimic the soul, but they aren't the soul. And New York Times reporters may fall in love with their digital avatars that they're interacting with instead of any of these popular programs these days that you can buy pornography on a retail basis from 18-year-olds. But that's not real. That's not real human interaction. Is it going to be possible for some version of Alex Newman to be uploaded digitally and explore the stars in a machine that might be produced in some future time? Absolutely. It would be a heck of a lot cheaper than having Alex Newman biologically in that tin can and needing to maintain him and feed him and give him oxygen, etc. But is that going to be the same as real human exploration? I'm not threatened by that. I am threatened by the people that believe that they can impose decisions on the rest of us based on things like modeling and their fantasies about immortality and replacing God. That I'm not okay with. And the fact that they have enormous financial resources doesn't give them the right to impose that on us. This gets back to that same question that I was talking about in medical ethics. Is this about the collective or is it about the individual? Is the focus of all of this on the individual or is it on the society? And that, Alex, the thing that bothers me the most right now is the emergence of what's called utilitarian bioethics. This is one of the new horizon forefronts of wokeism. And it asserts that the state has the right to enable the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Happiness is totally subjective. So it can be whatever some bureaucrat defines it to be. It can be defined in isolation. You're maximally happy if you have access to enough tofu, whatever the thing is, okay? But that may have nothing to do with what actually, you may be one of those idiosyncratic individuals who maximizes your happiness through a sense of personal freedom, self-actualization, and harmony with your creator. That may be what makes you happy, not necessarily what makes Yuval Harari happy. So Yuval Harari have the right to determine what makes you happy and then to impose that on you through the state. Fortunately, we have this thing called the Constitution, and it seems to be, if it's interpreted well and defended, a bastion against that. So now, there's another aspect of transhumanism. I am transhuman, just to be blunt, to shock you. And so are many of us of a certain age. I, as a young man, was rather liberal about using the oxyacetylene welder without having adequate eye protection. As a consequence, when I went into my eye doctor about a decade ago, he said, well, you have the eyes of a 75-year-old. And I had bad cataracts. I could hardly drive. So my lenses were pulled and replaced with what was then the latest synthetic lens technology. I see better than I've ever seen in my life because I've been extremely nearsighted. And I have no reservations about having accepted that. People, we can talk about implants. We can talk about implants for hearing. We can talk about implants for regulating cardiac function, right? We can talk about artificial joints. There's a lot of things that fit within the domain of what is technically transhumanism, the fusion of man and machine, that we commonly accept. And I think we need to come to grips with that. Those of us that are kind of intellectually processing this whole brave new world, somehow we need to come to grips with the fact that there are applications of technology, of machine, that we are willing to accept with informed consent into our beings, and we find them useful. Like, I'm so glad that I can read again and drive. And there are others that I think we have the right to reject. And I think that we also have the right as a nation state, as a citizenry of a nation state, to actively engage in the decisions of whether or not these things are going to be implemented using our money and the mechanisms of the state. And one example of that touches on another aspect that I think you were alluding to, which was, if you'll roll back in your mind, the president had just been sworn in on a bitter cold DC day, and I think it was the following day, there was a press conference with some tech giants that asserted that, and President Trump, bless his heart, fully endorsed the idea of spending over $1 trillion on developing advanced artificial intelligence because, basically, if we don't do it, they'll do it to us, is the core logic. And it's a great opportunity for advancement of industry and American competitiveness, and we are the technology leaders, and we should be leading in artificial intelligence. Not said was instead of the CCP, but that was pitched to the American public as a useful to them for a specific indication, not for transhumanism, not for enabling some future hyper machine intelligence capability. No, the pitch was, it's going to make your life better because it's going to make it possible to have RNA vaccines produced on short order in a custom fashion to cure your cancer. Now, if that isn't a disingenuous pitch, I don't know what is. I've spent way too much time pitching venture capitalists in an earlier phase of my life to not recognize a pitch when I see it. And that was a sales pitch, and it was finally crafted to trigger key hot buttons in President Trump, in my opinion. So let's examine that. What's the probability of a customized mRNA cancer vaccine based on some hyper-intelligent artificial computational capability? Well, the problem isn't defining the antigen. That's easy to do. It's been done for decades. The problem is the immune system and the role of the immune system in cancer. So we can talk about a cancer vaccine. The thesis is that, well, there's something going wrong in your immune system that has enabled that cancer to flourish in your body, because the truth is that cancer is what keeps your immune system is what keeps your cancers in check. We all develop cancer throughout our lives, and you and I have the privilege as being of, if we accept it's a binary and there are two genders, we are the gender that has a prostate. Maybe we can use that as a definition for what is a man. So by virtue of our possession of a prostate, if we live long enough, we will have prostate cancer. Will it kill us? No. But it will happen, at least at the microscopic level. So what is it that keeps us all from dying from cancer? Largely our cellular immune response. So what happens when cancer develops, metastatic cancer in particular? Usually it evolves as cells to be able to evade the processes, whether created or evolved, that allow your personal immune system to keep pop-up cancers in check. So what are those mechanisms that are being evaded? Well, we still don't really completely understand them. We're a long way from completely understanding them. Otherwise, we would already solve the problem, because there is a myriad of ways to produce a protein antigen that could be administered to you or I and elicit an immune response. And those ways have been rigorously explored using trillions of dollars over decades and decades of research by really smart, hardworking people. And they still haven't come up with the answer. Now, is an artificial intelligence capability at some point going to be able to crack the immune system and figure out how to do that? Could be. A question implicit in your comment earlier: can RNA vaccines ever be made safe? I've been asked that question now for a couple of years by journalists all over the world, and my stock answer, a little tongue-in-cheek, is pigs could fly if they had wings. There's no way for me to know the future that some whippersnapper at 28 working in some laboratory somewhere isn't going to fix the problem and come out with some fantastic new insight. I hope they do. It would be if we had another thing in our quiver to treat human disease. Is that a bad thing, so long as it's safe and effective? I don't want to get in the way of that. I've been accused. I got hate mail the other day, literal physical hate mail, which is rare. It's usually just electronic. Why are you standing in the way of this breakthrough technology that has such potential for curing human disease? Of course, the person sending it didn't give a return address or a name, and so I really can't answer them. But the point is, I don't think we should be blocking advancements in medical technology. We need to be astute in evaluating their risks and benefits. And but is it really prudent to invest trillions of dollars in the idea that somehow some computational widget can confer immortality? This is lately I've been kind of railing a little bit against scientism and the logic that Bobby, for instance, is politicizing the science. And often those that are making these arguments are conflating fundamental moral issues and ethical issues with science. Science does not teach us about morality. Science does not teach us about right and wrong. Ethics teach us about that. Theology teaches us about that. Our relationship to the Creator teaches us about that. Science does not teach that. Science can only inform those things that it can measure. And it can't really measure right and wrong. Philosophers argue about that again and again. And they, a subset of woke philosophers have now argued themselves into the position that's fundamentally communist, that the solution here is to optimize everything for the greatest happiness for the greatest number. But I don't think that is the domain of the government. It's certainly not the domain of science. It's the domain of, I guess, philosophers, but certainly it's the domain of this thing that has been so thoroughly ridiculed and sidelined and rejected, which is theology. And I think that we should push back on that. And those that are advancing the thesis that we use technology to confer immortality, I think that it is fair game to push back against that kind of logic. That it's all through the Bible, it's all through human history. It can be argued that that is the fundamental of the knowledge that Eve obtained metaphorically with the apple, or if you believe it literally. But we are not mortal. I mean, we are not immortal, and for good reason. And I think that a little bit of humility and a lot of practical common sense, like most people have, will teach that that whole Silicon Valley tech bro fantasy world of transhumanism is it's a false idol. It doesn't bring us collective happiness. It's not going to make for a better society, and in a way, it's an avoidance of our problems. Oh, we can't solve our problems, clearly, and so we need to create a new God. God out of the machine, Deus ex machina. We need to create something that will enable Deus ex machina to manage our fallible humanness. And the alternative is, well, maybe our fallible humanness is a good thing, and it's worth preserving. But the tech bros seem to just be infatuated by this as here's the nuance in my mind, as they grow older. They are confronting the fact that, like Steve Jobs, they will eventually pass. And I don't think they like it very much. And I think that they are infatuated with the idea of becoming this immortal super elite. They're not imagining transhumanism for the likes of you and me, Alex, I guarantee you.
Yeah.
So there's my comments on that.
All right, folks, we're coming to the end of this incredible interview. But before we go, I do want to let you know that this whole special episode was made possible by our sponsors at Victory Nutrition International. This is an incredible company. We are so honored to partner with them and to work with them. We're so thankful that they enable us to do stuff like this. And if you're thankful for that too, and if you want really incredible supplements that actually get in and are absorbed by your body, go check it out today. It's Victory Nutrition International. You can find them online at vni.life/Newman. That's vni.life/Newman. And when you use that promo code Newman20, again, it's Newman, N-E-W-M-A-N, 20, you're going to get a 20% discount off their already low prices. I'm telling you what, folks, I use this stuff every day now, and I wouldn't skip a day. It's fantastic. It makes you feel better. It works really, really great. And, of course, they help us do the great work that we do here at Liberty Sentinel Media. Stay tuned. We got a little bit more in this explosive interview with Dr. Robert Malone. And again, before we go, check out our sponsors, vni.life/Newman. Yeah, it's been fascinating, Dr. Malone. You've been extremely generous with your time. I know you have another appointment coming up. So I just want to thank you very much for joining us today, for sharing your insights. I agree with you on so much. You know, theology used to be called by a lot of the smartest people in the world the queen of the sciences. Now in the modern era, it's kind of been ridiculed to the point where people don't even want to talk about it. But before we let you go, what's the best place for people to follow your work? I know you've got some great books, Lies My Government Told Me, Psy-War, Enforcing the New World Order, which is fascinating. How do people sign up for your Substack, follow you on X, and all the rest?
Well, thank you for that. And I got a boost about the Substack in dicing it up with the senator last night. So the Substack is easy to find. It's malone.news. And on X, Truth Social, and Getter, no longer Gab. Gab is just too crazy for me. But on the other ones, you can find me at R.W. Malone, MD. And there's, of course, our websites, once again, R.W. Malone, MD, that have all kinds of information, PDFs of key government documents, the history of mRNA vaccination, and all the associated documents. It's there if you care to destroy your weekend by crawling through it, because it's built up. I mean, we have, there's thousands of essays now on Substack that are available to you, and you don't have to subscribe. And if you subscribe, you don't have to pay. The information is there for free. If you choose to pay a paid subscription, thank you, because that's what allows me to keep going, and my wife, with all of this. You know, the ACIP, the compensation from the government, I'm not sure Senator Blumenthal realizes this. Our total compensation for being on the ACIP and the endless hours associated is, for the 6 days a year we spend in Atlanta, we get $250 a day. So obviously we're doing this for the money. No, we're doing it as a public service. And we serve at the pleasure of the secretary. When the secretary decides he no longer needs us, we will no longer serve, and that's just the way that is. So thanks for asking. And one of the benefits of being a paid subscriber to Malone.news is you can participate in the chat room. And it's a very active chat community. Sometimes they bring more value than the essay does. We do that to keep the trolls out, because the trolls generally don't want to spend $5 a day, and it's enabled the creation, or $5 a month, I'm sorry. It's enabled the creation of a community, and I invite all of you to join. And if you don't want to pay, you can comment on X or Truth Social or Getter.
Very good. Dr. Malone, really appreciate your time. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I do encourage you to go check out those essays, a treasure trove of information. I want to thank you for tuning in. Get over to our website as well at libertysentinel.org. Thanks again for listening. We appreciate it. Until next time, God bless you all.